Thank you, Albie. Good morning, everyone. Good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation once again. Isn't it incredible? I've been sitting here working all morning, and as Albie says, over to you, the phone rings. But colleagues, that is how it is. And it's great to see so many familiar names, Albie, on this particular session. Today, of course, is a bit of a different session, mainly because I was asked to take a look at what the leading thoughts and thought leadership aspects were coming out of the World Employment Confederation conference that was held. And I've done quite a bit of research on this. We'll share the slides with you after the session. But it is really just about identifying and extrapolating some of the things that might spark your creativity, some things that may get you hooked on an idea to differentiate yourself. Colleagues, one thing I'm sure of is that every deep change, every industrial revolution, every significant event like COVID, digitization, social unrest, all of these events will either push you in the direction of being a casualty of change, or you can be a beneficiary of change. And whether you're a casualty or a beneficiary of change depends largely on your mindset, on your adaptability. I always think of that quote from Charles Darwin that says it's not the strongest or the most intelligent that survive, but those that are the most adaptable to change. For most of us, we're very thankful for the intelligence issue not being determinant of survival. Because if it was that, I think a whole lot of us would be in a lot of trouble. I certainly would be. But colleagues, I'm going to get stuck into it. I'll take a break every now and then. Let's see how it goes. But it's really today is just sharing ideas, sharing thoughts in terms of the world that Albie says we operate in. We operate in a global economy. And of course, we are increasingly connected and dependent on one another. So let's get cracking. And if you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to pop them into the chat box. I'll take a break every now and then. So these are the areas we'll be covering. We'll first just take a look at what is the World Employment Confederation. I mean, who are they? Where do they feature, and how do they give us insight? We will then focus on skills. And colleagues, this is a big concern that I see unfolding in front of us, is a massive deficit of skills. You know, the question is, will digitization, will artificial intelligence create jobs or destroy jobs? And right now, it's not that it will destroy jobs because it will augment jobs. But the problem is, if you don't have the skills to fill those augmented jobs, you're going to have a major problem. We'll look at the world of work and what the key trends are in the future of work. Obviously, look at digitization and then social innovation. These are the six key, sort of 5 or 6 key areas coming out of this discussion. Now, I just quickly want to make a comment, which I hope you'll take in the right attitude and the right light. Colleagues, as Albie said, I do have the opportunity to interact with many workforce solutions businesses. And I have a concern that the transformation of the industry, of the TES industry, the transformation of the workforce industry is a concern to me, because I see a linear evolution rather than an exponential change. I see change, but I don't see transformation. And I'm very concerned that a lot of the developments that are taking place over the next few years will have a very disruptive effect on your traditional business. You know, the TES environment will always be there, but if I take a look at the last 10 to 15 years, the semi-skilled and the unskilled component of your industry is declining. quite rapidly, especially the unskilled. Many of our clients don't even have unskilled workers anymore. The second thing is we see that there's a lack of growth in employment. The employment rate in South Africa is under extreme pressure, and PwC actually released research looking at 2030 and are very, very concerned that our narrow unemployment rate could be heading towards 35 to 40%. So what it means is you're going to have to look at new models, new technologies, new propositions in order to grow continuously. If you look at the results of some of the listed businesses in your environment, you would also see that there are significant pressures coming down upon you. So, you know, it's all about being a beneficiary of change. And the question is, you know, how do you position yourself in this environment? I want you to think of your camera on your cell phone 5 or 10 years ago. Just think of the quality of the pictures at that point in time versus your images and your videos that you get now on your telephone, on your cell phone. So the point I'm trying to make is once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. You know, once you've used Uber, or once you've used Checker 60, or once you've used Takealot, it's very difficult to go back to where you were previously. And that is what I think is concerning, is that there's an imminent change to your landscape. And once your clients and your candidates have seen that, it's going to be hard for them to go back to where they were. So just think of that, and let's see if we are able to collaborate and come up with any thoughts and ideas in terms of the World Employment Confederation and the trends in the industry. So colleagues, this confederation, as you know, represents the private employment services industry. I was in NEDLAC for 9 years, leading up to the 2015 LRA amendments. Johnny Goldberg and I headed up those negotiations, and part of that was I spent over 3 years, I spent time at the ILO in Geneva, in which the World Employment Confederation was the primary voice for the industry globally in the attempt to regulate temporary employment services. You'll remember at that point in time, COSATU and many of the unions, NACTU, wanted to ban the labor broker. And it was actually a global threat in many geographies. So the World Employment Confederation, with support from South Africa, we were there as well, and we then engaged at the ILO in terms of the conventions that impact this industry. The World Employment Confederation does incredible work, colleagues, in terms of the balancing of social justice with the business needs of organizations. So you'll see when you read and look at what we're going to talk about today, one of the biggest challenges remains for your industry is what I call regulated flexibility. In other words, you have to protect your candidates, your assignees, the people that you place and employ. You've got to protect their interests. They are human beings. They are just as important as your clients are. I always remember there was this ongoing imbalance in many organizations in your industry. You know, we put the clients on a pedestal, but we don't always afford the candidates the same sort of respect and dignity. And the World Employment Confederation has recognized this early on and saying the future of our business depends on your ability as a business to balance social justice with operational efficiencies. And I believe if you get that balance right, you will have an incredible opportunity to differentiate in the marketplace. What I also want to say is we've got to be careful, colleagues, in terms of our own mindsets. sometimes our own mindsets limit us in the innovations that we think of. For example, if you think of the solutions like Pay Me Now that are doing the rounds and coming to fruition, you know, sometimes I talk to companies and I say, have you thought about Pay Me Now? Have you thought about people being able to draw down on their salaries maybe in a week or 2 or 3, or they work for 3 days, can they draw down on that? And people say to me, oh, that's terrible. It's never going to work. What happens at the end of the month when these individuals need to pay their bills, etc.? And the bottom line is, yes, there's merit to that, but you've got to be empathetic. You know, if you look at the millennials, if you look at the people who form the bulk of those people you place, colleagues, you've got to take a look at their needs. It's not up to you to decide whether or not they should actually be drawing down on their salaries. In China, for example, they've got a term, I forget what it's called, but it's like permanent children, where kids are not leaving their parents. They're living with their parents in the same house until they, in their 30s and 40s, until their parents move on, you know, and leave this world. So, you know, they might not have the overheads and the financial obligations and things that we've always had and are used to. So let's keep an open mind about the solutions, and let's look at what the needs of our stakeholders are in that regard. So what we're going to focus on today is including research and insights and best practices related to the industry, and we can then see what we can glean from this. Well, colleagues, technology, of course, has a major impact on the way we work globally. I see more and more transitioning of TESs onto digital platforms where they intermediate between supply and demand. And of course, along with this comes the question of whether or not our workforces are being reskilled sufficiently. PwC recently said that artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence requires and will impact 40% reskilling of our workforce. The use of artificial intelligence means that everyone now has access to IP. Everyone has got equal access to information that is available on the internet. So what it means is that your employees, your leaders, they need to be equipped with skills that we often call soft skills, which will differentiate. So your leadership ability, your EQ, your ability to adapt, your ability to be resilient, your ability to be innovative. You see, those are the skills that are required because everyone's got access to the data and to the information. The differentiator lies in the culture of the organization and the ability of that organization to embrace these technologies and to keep it human-centric. One of the big challenges that the World Employment Confederation have identified, colleagues, is as we move into more and more automation of repetitive jobs, as artificial intelligence grows in its utilization, women are often the most affected and disrupted by this because traditionally women hold positions that are administrative by nature and positions that potentially lend themselves to automation more so. So you also have the social inequality that comes through. And the question is, how do you as organizations look at employment justice and say, when these disruptors come, you will still champion equality and equity off the back of that. And that's why purpose is so important, colleagues. What is the purpose that you stand for as an organization? So policymakers are having to take a very, very deep look at the impact of technology and the change, both in terms of skills and in terms of demographics. Well, in the context of skills, these are some of the primary findings of the World Employment Confederation. The first one, colleagues, that they are emphasizing and which we're all very familiar with is the issue of lifelong learning. The reality is that we have to ensure that our skills are fit for purpose. We have moved, colleagues, and this is very important. We have moved away from job security to employment security. The World Employment Confederation is sitting on international platforms and saying to trade unions, your ideology around job security is outdated. Companies are retrenching, restructuring, reskilling. We have to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Forget about job security. 28, 30-year-olds have already had 5 or 6 jobs. What's more important than job security is employment security. In other words, it's the ability to have the skills to ensure that you can be economically active. It's the ability to have digital intelligence, to have emotional intelligence, social intelligence, all of these things, and of course, IQ as well. That is more important than having job security because the world is changing so quickly. And the question I have today for many of you would be, how do you attach the lifelong learning, and as you can see in the middle, learning and working, work integrated learning, how do you attach that to your staffing proposition? How do you attach those competencies to that proposition? In other words, to differentiate yourself and say, we're not just interested in the here and now. We equip our people to have employment security by doing the following. And I think if you are not in that particular space, you're going to have a problem going forward because your employee value proposition, your ability to attract the right talent and to retain that talent is going to become increasingly more important as we face these particular disruptors. The work integrated learning experience is also very important. You are facing more and more disruption. If we take a look at South Africa, you've got Harambee, you've got Yes for Youth, you've got learnerships, internships, apprenticeships. You've got so many initiatives that are bearing down on you. You've also, colleagues, very, very importantly, if you take a look at disruptors and labor market reforms, I want you to think of these 3 or 4 disruptors and how you're responding to them. Maybe just write them down. This is what I think could either make you a casualty or a beneficiary of labor market reforms. The first thing is, how are you responding to the ministerial targets in the context of employment equity? Bearing in mind that each and every one of your clients over the next 5 years, okay, it's been pushed out by a year, but by 2029, there are 27,000 companies that have to report on employment equity. And those 27,000 companies employ 50 or more people. And they all are heading for a particular race, gender, and disability subcategory target. If there was ever a huge reform and a shift in the market, it's in the employment equity space. I've got clients that have to recruit as they get opportunities, clients that have to recruit literally hundreds of African male and African female colleagues at the various occupational levels, from entry level all the way through over the next 5 years. How do you support your clients get their EEA2, see where they need to be in 5 years from now, and support them in that regard? The next big labor market reform that you need to focus on, and again, even though the World Employment Conference identified this, that it applies in South Africa, is the whole issue of the national labor migration policy. Some of your clients have got small numbers of foreign nationals. But some of your clients have got massive numbers of foreign nationals, especially if they are multinational organizations. So how do you assist those clients with skills transfer, displacement of staff, and the like? The third area I want to touch on is the whole issue of platform work. The Employment Services Amendment Bill draws on international labor standards, and we see that platform work is busy being debated at Parliament, where the platform now becomes the employer of the platform worker. The Ubers of the world, the Takealots, the Checkers 60s, all those people are employed by someone. And my understanding and research in the space is that there are probably well over 100,000 employees, at the very least, that are driving around every day in vehicles and scooters delivering stuff. And one morning, these clients are going to wake up and realize they actually employ these people. They need to pay them UIF, workman's comp, SDL, COIDA. When there's a motorbike accident, they're going to have to, submit and report those claims. However, at the moment, they're paying them per delivery. Colleagues, I'm just giving you ideas, and these are touch points to engage with your clients. Of course, you've got BE and the whole issue of Yes for Youth and learnerships, which will continuously grow. So there are some propositions that you can think about, and there are ongoing changes. They're really, really ongoing changes in this regard. We take a look at the president of the World Employment Confederation, and one would think that the president, having a very, very broad view of the pressing issues in the industry, focuses specifically on two things. Take a look at what they're focusing on. The first one is skills mismatches. Okay, very, very important. And the second one is well-being. And the more I take a look at this, the more I realize that employee well-being is going to be a fundamental differentiator in your world. If I asked you now, what are you doing in respect of your employee well-being proposition? What access do your assignees have to well-being programs, being financial, emotional, relational, health? What access do they have to that? Because it's not only a massive issue, but it's being legislated. There is legislation that is on its way to entrench employee well-being. We already see the Workmen's Compensation Act, the COIDA Amendment Act, already being amended to say that employees at the workplace that are subject to high levels of stress, subject to high levels of physical engagement, they are going to be very, very focused on. And organizations are going to have a proposition in terms of that whole issue. So it's no longer just the physical injuries. It's no longer just about physical injuries and diseases. It's moving into the world of mental well-being. It's moving into anxiety disorders, depression, and those types of issues. And I can guarantee you that that is going to become a differentiator in your environment. The question is, how do you provide for this? You can go and take a look at Hello Coach, for example. There's a platform called Hello Coach, and you can go and take a look and see how well-being programs are being digitized, where employees can literally be given a code. They can log on to Hello Coach, and depending on whether it's a financial, personal, health, family, or work-related issue, they've got access to online coaches in a confidential environment of their choice. So it's an Uber platform for certified coaches and well-being. And I want you to think, colleagues, about your assignees that you're placing with your clients. Let me give you an example. All of you have been to hotels. You've traveled either locally or internationally. You'll walk into one hotel and you'll need your coffee for the day. And you'll go to a waitron and you'll say, please, may I have a cup of coffee? How do I get one? And then they'll say to you, are you a resident here? Are you one of our clients? And you'll say, no. And they'll say, I've got to go and ask my supervisor. They run away, they go and ask the supervisor if they can give you a simple cup of black coffee, even at a price. They'll come back and say, well, it's going to cost you 20 Rand, whatever the case may be. So they're very task focused. You'll go into other establishments and you'll walk up and say, I'm desperately looking for a black coffee. And they'll say, absolutely, have a seat, we'll organize it for you. Because they put the connection and the relationship ahead of the task. And I can guarantee you that those hotels that have that customer-centric approach derive that from their leadership, because their leaders give them a psychologically safe environment. Their leaders say, I've got your back. Their leaders say that it's more important to connect than to just go straight to the task, because your clients are human beings, your employees are human beings, your colleagues are human beings. If you don't understand people, you don't understand business. And I'm raising this today because all your assignees that you place are presenting a culture to your clients. All of them are engaging with people. And that engagement is either going to be reflective and building of your reputation, or it's going to break it down. And I really think emotional intelligence should be a mandatory requirement. If you're going to place someone in a client or in a client-facing situation, they've got to have the ability to connect. Not only will it help them drive customer satisfaction levels, but it will also, colleagues, give them resilience, because when they deal with difficult situations, they'll be able to process them, to rationalize, and to be more adaptive. Just think of the impact that that small capacitation will have on staff turnover, client complaints, and so on and so forth. But it's a soft skill, and most companies say it's a soft skill. We won't prioritize it, but if it's a soft skill, why is it so hard to find, colleagues? I'm really, really passionate about that, and I think we're too focused on the task. We need to focus on these people as individuals and as human beings. Colleagues, the World Employment Confederation also reminds all TESs to not forget the decent work agenda. So when you are presenting your proposition to clients, when you are presenting your proposition to your assignees and your candidates, these are the 4 pillars that you need to emphasize, that you are committed to employment creation. And of course, you need to vocalize that. You need to explain what percentage of your workforce comprises youth, women, designated groups, first-time job seekers. Employment creation is critical. The second one are the rights at work. How do you, as a TES and as an association, drive a certain standard of professionalism to ensure that employees' rights at work are not undermined? And I want to focus specifically on this issue of discrimination in employment. Colleagues, if you really, really want trouble going forward, then you need to not focus on the code of good practice on harassment at the workplace. Colleagues, I'm telling you now, the code of good practice on harassment at the workplace specifically requires employers to take proactive steps in preventing and eliminating harassment. And your assignees are probably some of the most vulnerable people, because they are being placed on a third-party site. They are isolated to the extent of you being party to the employment relationship. And remember, colleagues, Section 57 of the Employment Equity Act says that you and your client are jointly and severally liable for unfair discrimination. Now, if your assignees have not been trained and created an awareness on what harassment is, the forms of harassment, if your assignees do not have access to grievance procedures and to opportunities and channels to raise any form of discrimination and harassment, if you cannot prove that you do regular harassment risk assessments as required in 8.1 of the code, and something goes wrong, then under Section 60 of the Employment Equity Act, you, as the TES, will be vicariously liable for that discrimination. It could mean that you not only end up in the Labour Court, but it could mean under the Amendment Act that under employment equity, you lose your certificate of compliance. So you need to think about your service level agreements with your clients and how you regulate harassment and unfair discrimination. You need to say, you as a TES, what proactive measures are you putting in place in order to safeguard your assignees? You see, colleagues, it's this human aspect that is coming to the fore, because technology gives us all the same point of departure. The differentiator comes in terms of human centricity. I know it comes at a cost, but you need to figure out how to do that optimally. The next thing is social protection. And you've got to then take a look at the benefits that you provide to your employees, to their families, and how social protection can assist them. And then social dialogue. The mere fact that you're part of the TESD, as part of CAPES, as part of Business Unity South Africa, as part of NEDLAC, the mere fact that you are there shows that you are engaged in the broader interests of the country. Colleagues, if you read the latest NEDLAC report, you'll see a scathing review of NEDLAC, where Cas Kuvadia, the CEO of Business Unity South Africa, says NEDLAC is facing an existential crisis. They're saying that NEDLAC's ideologies across the stakeholders are so disparate that NEDLAC is incapable at this point in time of achieving any meaningful consensus amongst the various parties, union, labor, government, and employers. But social dialogue has to take place, and you need to lead that dialogue in South Africa and draw on the World Employment Confederation. So, colleagues, let's move on to the world of work. The world of work, of course, critical in terms of our social identity, not only to achieve economic well-being, but also personal fulfillment. And isn't it amazing, colleagues? And again, I want you to look at this. Look at the overriding themes. They are saying to you, yes, legal compliance is a given. You must do that. You've got to look at social security. But it keeps coming back to the issue of the human being. They keep coming back to that aspect, because ultimately the human dignity of that person is of critical importance, because when we work, we are fulfilling a personal agenda as well. We are looking for purpose. We are looking for self-actualization. We're looking for belonging. We're looking for economic well-being, and we're looking to provide for those around us. And I really want to encourage you to reflect on how is it that you are giving effect to the purpose of the individual people that are being impacted. When we look at the issue of accelerating technological change, as I said earlier, technological innovation is both destroying and creating jobs as human labor is substituted or complemented with machines. Colleagues, I've got a number of clients that use TESs. They've used TESs in manufacturing environments, in production environments, and often they've outsourced entire sections of their business to TESs. But their intention in outsourcing them was always that they were going to automate those sections. They were going to reskill people in those sections and ultimately phase them out. And many companies are pursuing that option. They're looking at a production line or manufacturing process, they're automating it, they're digitizing it, and they are proactively saying, we don't want to deal with the back end of this. We want to give it to a TES or outsource or subcontract it through a functional outsource arrangement so that we can make it someone else's problem. And I think there's opportunity in that for you as TESs in terms of taking on those opportunities, phasing out, and then outplacing and dealing with those particular staff and reskilling them. I think it's a great opportunity and you need a bill for that. But the point though, colleagues, is to what extent are you engaging with your clients and saying, what is the shift? If you look at the middle one, yeah, what is the shift in customer needs? When do you sit with your clients and talk about what they are doing on electric vehicles, on the new component manufacturers, on food manufacturing? Are you sitting having these discussions and saying to your clients, we want your EEA2, we want to see your WSP ATR, we want to see where you're going to be in 3 to 5 years from now because we can help you. We can help you in terms of managing this environment. I want you to remember, colleagues, it took 5 days to get a million users on ChatGPT. I'm sure all of you have used ChatGPT. It took all of 5 days to get 1 million people on ChatGPT. It took 3.5 years to get 1 million people onto Netflix. The point I'm making is once there is a disruptive innovation in your environment and it picks up traction, we no longer have a bell curve change or a linear change. You're going to face what we call a shark fin curve, where the change is exponential. And you need to ask yourself, how can you be a leader ahead of the curve in that regard? And the only way to do that is to immerse yourself in the world of your client. Go to your clients, go and do benchmarking. You know, if you've got a client in the wholesale and retail industry, and you know that it's important for that client to get their employment equity certificate, or it's important for that client to get their BE level up to a level 2 or 3 or 1, go and do benchmarking for them. Go and do value-added research. Go and get the Employment Equity Commission reports and benchmark your clients against their peer groups. And go to them and say, listen, you're falling behind in terms of your race and gender distribution here at these levels. You need to look at this. This category of work is declining fast. You need to start creating an environment of engagement and value add for your clients. When last did you give them a white paper on their business and how they're stacking up against their competitors? Because I'm telling you now, colleagues, there are other organizations that are doing just that. There are some big non-TES organizations that place people on a non-profit basis that are doing deep research into these labor market disruptors. And they are going to your traditional clients and they're saying to them, we can give you better BE results, we can give you the same tax advantages, we can give you the skills and whatever it is, and you know, this is our proposition. And we just supported by government and there's legislation. That's what you're up against in terms of this. So very important, customer needs and customer engagement. Go and do your own research and benchmarking, create a burning platform for your clients and see what you can do in that regard. You need to lead the discussions with your clients on that. And then the last thing here on the right, technology-enabled opportunities to monetize free services. Colleagues, the sharing economy is so important. As I said to you, artificial intelligence and the internet gives us all access to the same information and expertise. The question to you is, how do you monetize free information? How do you add value in a sharing environment and benefit off the back of that financially? Because if you think of it, and I just want to give you an example. As a business, Global Business Solutions, before COVID, we sat down and we said, well, we want to share. We want to share our expertise with our clients and interested parties. Let's start a WhatsApp group called Ask Johnny. Okay, so of course, Johnny Goldberg, our chairman, being who he is, given his profile, we said, let's call it Ask Johnny. It's a lovely, phrase, Ask Johnny, because we're always asking Johnny. And then we grappled, colleagues. We said, but goodness, now what's going to happen to our billings? Because Albie's going to want to ask a question, and Albie's going to want to say, well, what happens in the event that someone is injured at work, for example, and they were on their way to work? Does commuting to and from work fall within the realm of the scope and course of your duties? Is it a COIDA claim if you get injured in a car accident on your way to work? Now, what if Albie asks us that question on the Ask Johnny chat group, and we answer it and we don't charge Albie? Now we're losing out on billings. And we had this huge debate about how potentially our lawyers and our consultants might spend half their day just answering people's questions. But we actually overcame our own mental limitations, and we said, we want to share. We want to make sure. We want to make sure that we as a company drive and underpin our philosophy of sharing. And I can guarantee you, colleagues, we now have clients, over 450 clients on that Ask Johnny chat group, and they're answering each other's questions. We're not even involved most of the time in answering questions. They're just too keen to share. And the question I have for you today is, what are you doing to use technology and to offer free services and to use the information and the data that you have, but in a way that still generates a monetary return on investment? Let's move on to the shifting labor demographics. Of course, aging populations in many parts of the world are causing significant shortages in terms of generations. We see by 2025, we'll see more than half the workforce will comprise millennials. A massive change in the age structuring and strata of organizations. The question I have again comes back to the issue of emotional intelligence. If you think of millennials, their whole disposition often is what we call free child. So millennials, if you think of when you were younger, at university or technical college, or when you were starting your life of freedom, what was your primary ego state? I can guarantee you were a free child. You couldn't wait for Friday to go and have a jol. Life was a party. You couldn't delay gratification. You only thought of living in the moment. You wanted it all, and you want it now. Now, what happens is a big part of your workforce that you're placing are free children. They live in the world of immediate gratification. That's why I also refer to pay me now. If they've worked for 3 days and they've got Lentedag coming up and they need a few $100 to go to Lentedag, well, why can't they cash in on their 3 days that they've worked, and take their money and go and spend it? So you've got to take a look at the shifting demographics and say, how do we appeal to the free children? How do we engage with them rather than judge them? Because many of us who may be older on this call, your ego state has changed from free child to maybe being more critical and task-focused. So how do you connect with your workforce in order to ensure that you build a strong bond with them? Of course, urbanization of the working population continues. And then on the far right, colleagues, an increasingly diverse workforce, moving away from a primary white male breadwinner mentality to a totally diverse, from elderly to students to people with disabilities and ethnic minorities, etc. And again, how do you underpin and specifically focus on this as part of your business strategy? Employee expectations are changing as well. Of course, flexible and self-directed forms of work that allow for better work-life balance. My question is, in terms of work-life balance and employee well-being, as I said earlier, what are you offering in terms of support in that regard? If you look at the middle, a desire to work with a purpose to enable people to fulfill their opportunities and their dreams. You know, how do you manifest and support people in terms of that? How do you assist them in managing careers? How do you engage with them? How do you communicate with them on a regular basis? And what we find is we're moving away from the one-size-fits-all to a much more specific human-centric approach. So very, very important is to look at the issue of purpose and how you assist people in fulfilling their particular purpose and have those discussions with them. Well, different ways to contract and employ labor is a massive, massive issue. What we are finding as well is remote work and contracting around remote work is presenting significant challenges. When it comes to occupational health and safety, for example, with remote work, how do you contract around that? How do you ensure that employees are still allowed to and required to ensure that when they work remotely, their workspaces are healthy and safe? So you've got this coexistence of different ways to contract. One of the things that NEDLAC are currently busy with is the whole issue of digital transformation. And how does basic conditions of employment, for example, impact remote work and online work platforms? Colleagues, one of the things they're discussing is the right to disconnect. And I found that quite interesting. The right to disconnect, they're currently talking about the fact that people are always on. So when they amend the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, you're going to have a new law, which is the right to disconnect. So just like you used to have normal working hours of 45 hours or whatever it is a week, and then premium payments on Sundays and public holidays, you're going to have a new chapter in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act focused specifically on digital work and the hours of work and the right to disconnect. So you're going to be able to, let's call it, disconnect by law. Companies are going to have to start managing their emails and their communications at night and over weekends. You're going to have a whole policy in respect of acceptable communication practices in terms of the well-being of the workforce and the work-life balance. Colleagues, we also, of course, have the emergence of new platforms providing access to talent. What we're also finding is a lot of international firms looking at the South African labor market, where the labor is still relatively cheap, and using online platforms to use those people in South Africa to provide online services to geographies in the US, in Australia, and in India, for example. So freelancing and labor sharing and new platforms to access talent emerging very quickly. One thing that I really believe there's a big opportunity for is to take the whole TES proposition online, but not as a TES, to take it online as a fixed-term contract platform In other words, there are companies that may not want to procure from a TES, but they still need fixed-term contractors. There are companies that the unions might say we're not interested in using TESs, but they still need cyclical, seasonal, or fixed-term employees. So how do they get access to fixed-term contractors who've been vetted, who've been verified? How do they enter into contracts online with these people and bring them in? How do they know if they are worthwhile? If you look at an Uber driver, how many trips they've done. And I really believe you're sitting with these massive databases of candidates who've been verified. They've been credit, criminal reference checked, qualification checked, that you know where they've worked previously, you can rate them. On the other hand, you've got clients that might not want to use a TES. They would rather just go straight to section 198 capital B and contract directly with those fixed-term contractors. You can use a whole range of technologies to manage that, to generate an appropriate online fixed-term contract and to intermediate that without being a TES. You know, I don't see that happening necessarily. So colleagues, these new platforms and the new environments that offer themselves a great opportunity for that. And then on the far right-hand side, who are your partners? What are your ecosystems? Who do you go to war with in respect of your proposition? Are you partnering with other stakeholders who can complement your core service offering? I think of Baldwin Properties, for example, that don't only build these massive residential estates, but they partner with schools and restaurants and sporting facilities and gyms to give you a fully integrated experience in your place of residence. Who are you partnering with in order to cover employee well-being, in order to cover financial assistance, in order to cover financial services, in order to cover career and succession planning, and so on and so forth? What is your proposition? Because you cannot do that all on your own. You need to work with people and other industries and collaborate in terms of your proposition. Well, colleagues, I know I'm talking a lot, but I'm just sharing ideas with you because, you know, it all emanates fundamentally from the World Employment Confederation. And if these are key issues for them, well, I would suspect that we also need to take cognizance of these. Colleagues, we also see a greater economic and political volatility leading to higher uncertainty. In other words, if we take a look at what's happening right now in South Africa, we see a lot of populist policies coming through. The National Health Insurance Scheme, for example, is making its way through the National Council of Provinces. And there's some big concerns about the NHI because it's going to add a layer of cost and mandatory contribution. If we take a look at the labour law review process where laws were supposed to be renegotiated at NEDLAC and made less onerous, we see the Department of Labour yesterday saying in a press release that they've missed the parliamentary deadline and they're not that interested in making it easier, especially for small and medium-sized businesses to operate. So the political environment in which we find ourselves is a massive concern, and you need to engage your clients on that and see how you can assist them in responding to that. Then we take a look at the issue of subcontracting, outsourcing, and global supply chain management. We've got a huge increase in our engagements with clients to decrease the size of their payrolls. Clients are trying anything they can to make their payroll smaller and to increase their procurement spend, because everything in South Africa of any significance is a percentage of payroll or a percentage of headcount. So people with disabilities, 2% of headcount. Your employment equity targets are percentages of your headcount. Your BE management control and skills development are based on your head count. So organizations are now saying, not only for purposes of flexibility, but how can we subcontract, outsource, and use TESs increasingly to make our payroll smaller and to improve our procurement from empowered providers. And that's going to be critical. And then off the back of that, I want to emphasize to you, colleagues, your ability to procure work going forward is going to be very dependent on you getting your employment equity certificates of compliance. And I need you to go and look internally, and I need you to go and look at your employment equity targets. You need to do a gap analysis of the ministerial targets to 2029, and you need to determine how you will ensure that you meet those targets. Because if you don't get a certificate of compliance, you're going to be cut out of these supply chain networks, and you're going to have major, major challenges going forward. Also remembering what I spoke about harassment earlier. If your organization is found wanting in the labor court or the CCMA, because you cannot prove you've taken reasonable steps to prevent harassment, well, then, colleagues, you will also lose your certificate of compliance. So you're going to get called on to present that you've done what is necessary proactively in order to prevent harassment at the workplace. Well, colleagues, the changing demand for skills, of course, is significant. What I really take away from the World Employment Confederation, look at what they're saying here, an increasing need for soft skills and ability for lifelong learning to ensure long-term employability. You see, it's about employment security. A lot of the biggest TSs in the world are also some of the biggest training providers. If you take a look at Advotech, many of you would know the Advotech group. Go and take a look at them. They're a listed business. Go and take a look at their financial results compared to some of the other more traditional TES environments. And you'll see their results are incredibly strong because they are looking at the entire value chain. They're looking at learning institutions. They're looking at bringing people through learning, primary, secondary, tertiary learning, and then into the world of work. And I think it's that ability to harness that whole value chain meaningfully, which is going to give you the strength going forward in terms of the supply of talent and access to talent, and also margins. Your margins are continuously under pressure. Margin growth is going to find itself in where you can supply those services of people with the appropriate knowledge and skills and emotional intelligence to ensure that they're adaptable and they can learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I haven't seen many specific initiatives in your environment around the soft skills proposition for your temporary assignees. And they are your ambassadors to your clients. They're your ambassadors to your clients' employees. They effectively are your face. But to what extent are we giving them the resilience, the adaptability, the self-reflection and awareness skills that are required? Of course, we spoke about technological innovation and skill sets that are uprooting and changing significant labor market dynamics. Well, if we take a look at the global labor market, just some statistics that might be of interest to you. Colleagues, I think for me in this particular environment is we've got a massive labor force, 3.545 billion people in 2021, says the World Bank. But what we find is the labor force growth rate is lagging. So the unemployment rate is growing, but the labor force is growing faster than the employment rate. So we've got increasing levels of unemployment, increasing levels of disconnect in terms of skills, knowledge, and experience. We also see self-employed workers as a result of the digital economy and moving into the fifth industrial revolution. We see a growth in the number of people doing it for themselves. So self-employed people growing. Wage and salaried workers, only 53.5%, of course, of the global workforce. So most people, well, not most, but a huge percentage, almost half, are looking at entrepreneurial skills, self-employment, and driving that proposition. Of course, older workers, 11.7%, and that's another area that needs to be focused on. You know, who's retiring in your client organization's environment with the aging workforce flowing through? How do you supply entry-level skills to ensure a talent pipeline going forward? Of course, migrant labor is still a big focus area in terms of the World Economic Forum and the global displacement of people. So that's a massive issue. And then, of course, youth unemployment. Colleagues, the future of work. Let's take a very quick look at the World Employment Confederation talking about the rapid changes in technology, demographics, diversity, globalization, climate change, new production models. You know, these are the structural shifts reshaping the world of work. And of course, off the back of this, you've got labor laws and your operating models that need to align to these technological changes. Unfortunately, if we take a look at the training plans of organizations, they lag behind in terms of the technological skills that are required, the digital intelligence that is required. Many organizations are losing traction because of leadership who do not set the tone. Many organizations' leadership are not embracing it, which means that your workforce are actually adopting more advanced technologies than the company uses. And over time, employees realize this, and then they move on because they're scared of becoming outdated and potentially losing their opportunities. Now, colleagues, the reality is South Africa is growing at an economic growth rate of 0.6%. That's the latest Q2 statistics. So if we look at a 0.2% growth rate in the economy, we see that equals pretty much zero increase in employment. And the impact of that is that we need to then take a look at where the changes are taking place and how we can optimize the opportunities that present themselves in that environment. So we've spoken about a lot in terms of the world of work changing. For me, as I said, one of the biggest opportunities is to see how you can provide remote TES opportunities to your clients. Also, how you can use your on-demand economy, your digital platforms to intermediate fixed-term contracts. I don't believe you've always got to be a TES and be the employer. As I said to you, I think that you could have a platform that automates clients' ability to access people just for fixed-term contracts. You've got an incredible opportunity for clients to do it for themselves rather than going through yourselves as a TES. Remember, what we're seeing happening is companies are reducing their permanent headcount. Can definitely see that happening over time. The transition is then to temporary employment services. And even now beyond TESs, the transition is into outsourcing, subcontracting, and then the next step, which is growing in terms of the on-demand economy, is this whole platform-based work environment. It's just going to grow and grow and grow, and you need to say, how do we get involved in that regard? So it's a matter of saying, as a workforce solutions business, if you look at social innovation, how do you offer a proposition across these diverse forms of work? In other words, how do you position yourself to meet a client's needs for permanent recruitment, TES, subcontracting and outsourcing, as well as platform-based work? How do you offer that proposition? That's the first thing. Secondly, how do you underpin that with the soft skills? How do you underpin that with emotional intelligence, well-being programs, and continuous learning. It's that ability to bring that ecosystem together and to create stickiness, which is going to differentiate you over time. The second one is workers' access to fundamental rights. Colleagues, your assignees' access to their legal rights, your assignees' education and awareness around their rights and obligations is so, so, so important. And it's your ability to create a safe environment for your assignees that's going to also be very important. And then, of course, research. Another thing that I'm finding is in the past, this industry used to be thought leaders. This industry used to have people who did extensive research into the labor market. They'd get out there, they'd publish their research, they would literally create disruption, they would challenge certain Stats South Africa statistics, they would be voices that are heard and leaders in this environment, and I'm not seeing that anymore. I'm not seeing enough conferences, I'm not seeing enough stakeholder engagements where what's on the screen is taken and published. On the contrary, you've got other organizations stealing your lunch. You've got other organizations, eating around the edges and reducing your opportunities because they are, I think, in many respects, taking the lead on those particular areas. So in summary for today's session, and then we can maybe just open up, as I said, today's a bit of a different thing. It's really just sharing with you the key findings in the World Employment Confederation, some of the key issues. But if we take a look at it in summary, colleagues, these are the key issues. The first one is the volatile and complex environment is challenging traditional business models. I think of the story of Blockbuster and Netflix, where Blockbuster's business model was very operational. Blockbuster hired out videos. They were operationally excellent, but what they didn't do is focus on the human aspect. So when Netflix came along and offered unlimited access at a cheap rate, no fines for bringing your videos late, what you found was the traditional operating model of Blockbuster was totally replaced and disrupted by Netflix. If you look at Kodak, their operating model was focused on printing photographs. That was Kodak. Their leadership, when faced with the prospect of a digital camera, their leadership's mind shift was inhibited. They didn't want to have to change their operating models, change their systems, change their financial models. And of course, we know what happened to Kodak. The same applies to Nokia. The same applies to Musica. And there are many businesses that are facing the same challenge. And my challenge to you today is, what is your Kodak moment? What is your Blockbuster moment? If you take a look at your business and your trends, are you on borrowed time? And if you're on borrowed time, if you're on borrowed time, why is that? That is what I want you to look into. And you're only going to find that out by engaging with your clients. So what we see here, it says mass customization has replaced mass production. In other words, the World Employment Confederation are saying the traditional proposition that TESs and perm recruitment agencies and whatever it is, the traditional proposition, the one size fits all, has been replaced with customization. So it's still having all your resources, but the opportunity for customers to use those resources in different ways. Some customers want to use your TES proposition to drive employment equity. Others want to use it for flexibility. Others want to outsource their payroll. Others want to subcontract. Others want to automate. How well positioned are you to have those discussions to ensure that you customize your proposition? And that can only happen with close engagement. The next one, the platformization of businesses in response to the rise of the on-demand economy. In other words, to what extent is your business using digital platforms to allow for on-demand, to allow for the millennials in terms of your candidates to have access on demand to well-being, access to financial assistance, access to skills development? To what extent is it possible for your client likewise to access your propositions without the traditional administrative challenges? The World Employment Confederation also talk about lean startup revolutions and a new appetite for entrepreneurship, challenging wage employment. You know, to what extent are you potentially assisting your clients in pulling together a proposition that pulls together various propositions, LinkedIn, online platforms, Fiverr, Upwork, Elance, whatever it is, you know, you need to start looking at ways to revolutionize how you provide those services. Also blurring lines between services and industry. You know, the outsourcing and subcontracting where you are being required to actually start delivering on outcomes in our environment. Well, colleagues, these are some of the key aspects that were raised by the World Employment Confederation. So I think just in conclusion, and I know I've been talking for very long, and I apologize in advance for that, Albie colleagues, but you know, this isn't something that is very easy to translate into specifics. It's more thought-provoking. It's to challenge you to learn from the experiences of others. So maybe just in summary, before Albie, I hand back to you. For me, I think there are three takeaways out of the World Employment Confederation. The first takeaway, colleagues, is customization. You know, how are you taking what you have in terms of your massive databases, your systems, your data, your technologies? How are you taking that, but still allowing your candidates, your applicants, and your clients to feel that they can access what they need? The reality is our clients have got so many pressures bearing down on them. You know, the COIDA Amendment Act, for example, is going to absolutely transform the injury on duty space. And you as the TES are liable for injuries on duty. And if someone's injured on duty, there's going to be an incredible case management requirement. See that as an opportunity to go to clients and say, we'll take this whole burden away from you. Here's our proposition in this regard. It's about customizing it. It's about addressing those issues. And you only can customize by listening and understanding your customer's workspace. The second thing I want to take out of this is they're saying that the World Employment Confederation is saying we live in a world of uncertainty. And in a world of uncertainty, your knowledge and your skills are limited. In a world of uncertainty, what's more important is collaboration. So the second thing they're saying is don't do it on your own. Surround yourself with partners who are able to go into your clients and go and give them a proposition that differentiates you. You are not in a position to predict what your client needs. Only your client knows that, and you need to get under your client's skin, and you need to become a strategic partner of that client. And then the third and final message from the World Employment Confederation is to balance, as an industry and as companies, to balance social justice with business sustainability. Now, if your business was mainly focused on the economic and financial aspects, and you know right now today that you are not investing the necessary social justice requirements. When I talk about social justice, I'm talking about harassment, I'm talking about benefits, I'm talking about well-being, I'm talking about reskilling and upskilling. You see, colleagues, in the world we live in now, those are critical issues. The question is, how do you offer those in a manner that will not reduce your sustainability? And maybe just to use a silly example again, the sharing economy. It's an amazing thing, colleagues. It doesn't always work, but it's a general rule. You know, if you cast your bread on the water, in due time, it will return to you. And I want to encourage you today that by sharing and by caring, by treating people as human beings and investing in them, the impact you have on them and their commitment to your organization is significant. And that in itself will reduce staff turnover, poor performance. That in itself will make your organizations more flexible, adaptable, and less resistant to change. But it's often the case that the human element lags. The Companies Act, just for interest's sake, is being amended as well, as you've read. And the Companies Act is really throwing the cat amongst the pigeons. The Companies Act is requiring a mandatory disclosure of remuneration, for example. The top 5% earnings, people on average, and the bottom 5% in organizations. It's going to have to be published. They want to encourage debate around remuneration inequalities. So companies that are listed businesses, companies that meet that public interest score in the Companies Act, even if you're not a listed business, you're going to be disclosing your highest earners and your lowest earners. And you're going to have to publish that, and you're going to attract the attention from a whole range of stakeholders. And they want to do that because they want to stimulate discussion around inequalities and the like. So this drive for social ethics and human-centric behavior is not going anywhere. And the reason for that, as I said, is this new world of work, if left unregulated, can create massive challenges. Well, colleagues, I hope that that has assisted to some extent, maybe generated some ideas. Get close to your clients. That's all I can say. Get close to your clients, get under their skin, lead these discussions, because if you don't, someone else will lead them for you. LB, I'm going to hand back to you. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Very interesting as always. You know, just an observation from our side. You know, we understand and I get the fact that we need to change and we need to develop these platforms and additional services for the employees, etc. I get that. But when we start looking at business and the needs of people, it's just my view, when we start tinkering with that in terms of law, enforcing certain things onto businesses, like platform work, for argument's sake. So if I'm a millennial youngster, which I'm not anymore, but my decision is the following. I want to work for as many platforms as I want to. I want to diversify, whether that be knowledge work, delivery work, whatever the case might be. Where does it leave us then with the choice that individuals have how they want to be employed? I think that's always a question that we've got.
Yeah, Albie, and I mean it's a good question, and you know, the analogy that I would use is we always knew there'd be a convergence of technology. So you remember the first cell phones in the late 90s. I still remember how proud I was with my first cell phone, but we always knew technology would converge. You'd have your alarm, your maps, your diary, your emails, everything on one particular device. But we knew it was coming, but we didn't quite know what it would look like. So compare your first cell phone to what you have now, to the fact that you can look on your watch and get your messages. So I think what I'm really saying is, and this is the big challenge. This is the challenge that you raise, Albie, is we don't know exactly what the future is going to look like. And that's the message here. We don't know exactly what workforce solutions will look like in the future, but what we do know is it's going to have to meet the needs of diverse users. So on the one hand, you're going to have candidates, old codgers like me, not so old like you, but still aging. You're going to have millennials, etc. So you're going to have that whole, let's call it talent pool. Some of them want to just work online. Some of them want to work just remotely. Some of them want 3 or 4 jobs and sources of income. Others might want to engage and be at the workplace. Others might want to just temp when they want to temp or be physically on site. The point I'm making is you need to start segmenting that need, because remember, and very important, if you think of design thinking, it's all about empathizing. So if that's your candidate pool with the diversity, the next question is then, where's the demand?
Mm-hmm.
So the demand is in the world of your clients. So if you look at your clients, you've got, let's say, ShopRite Checkers. They're busy with, as we all know, it's been published, they're busy with stores, concept stores without any employees. They're busy with Checker 60. They're busy with warehousing. They're busy with distribution. They've got more than 3,000 retail stores. If you just think of that one business, they need all the candidates we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I can guarantee you ShopRite Checkers need remote workers. They need drivers, Checker 60 drivers. They need on-site reach truck and forklift drivers, etc. So there's the client and the source of demand if you segment it. In the back end, you've got this big candidate pool. Then you need this intermediation platform to intermediate that process. So I'll be exactly what it looks like, I'm not sure, but what we do know is that it's more than just a TES that's being looked for. What we do know, it's more than just a perm recruitment agency. It's more than just subcontracting and outsourcing. And then on the supply side, it's got to do with a hell of a lot more than just a fixed term contract and I'll place you and I'll pay you, you know. And I think it's in monetizing that process and how you structure it that you find the solution. I'm just worried we're a one-trick pony. And I don't mean to be disparaging because, as you said, I come from the industry. I'm just worried that we're a one-trick pony. And when people get tired of that particular trick of ours, they're going to move on somewhere else.
Yeah,
that's what I'm worried about.
I tend to agree with you. I mean, everybody, when you sit down and you speak to your client, it says, man, labor broking 101, bring work, pay, invoice, go home. And that's what I want. And when you start talking about the other things, they sort of look at you like, listen, where did you come from? Were you beamed down by Scotty? What was your story? You know, and I think you're talking about the skills that are required. And I'm sure everybody on this platform, if we start looking at our databases of people, there's a lot of skills there. And then I'm talking about the aging population, where the guy's in his 60s, he's not into this, I want to go to the office and live with the stress. I'd rather do a short-term thing for you and you know, get it over and done with. But clients are still very much fixed on this office thing. It has to be here, this, and there has to be this form of employment. Now, how are we going to do that? I don't know. We'll have to find a way, like you said. But I think it requires a mindset change, not only from the GES. And yes, as being thought leaders, you need to open those discussions, but from business in general. And I think, I mean, I just speak out of my own experience. My brother works for medical aid company, and they realized that one of the guys, when they called him in for a meeting to the head office, he said to him, it's going to be difficult. They said, why? He says, no, because I'm in Canada. And that happened in COVID. So he moved from South Africa. He got caught in India, did his work there with his sister, and then moved to his other sister in Canada. But his work was done. It was he was on all of the meetings. And then the penny sort of dropped, where they said, oh, these people, certain people in our business don't need to be in our business, don't need to be in a physical office. I mean, Malbert works for them and he sits in Mossel Bay now. He's migrated there. And I think if more companies start thinking about that, all right, it's not going to work for everybody. But if more companies start thinking that way and not, you know, that would be an evolution, that there's a space for us to help with that, to allow them the access to find those people. And then, you know, the other side of the coin is that, you know, certain jobs you need to have a physical presence there, and it's the balance between the two.
Yeah. So Albie, while you're talking, I thought of a slide that I wanted to show you. I'm just going to pop it up very quickly. So I want to give you a sense of disruptors and the extent of disruptors. So if you take a look at foreign nationals and this whole move. Now, I know the Helen Suzman Foundation are litigating and, you know, they don't want foreign nationals to, you know, to necessarily be displaced because they've entrenched and rooted themselves. But they're between 200 and 500,000 employees who could be displaced ultimately because of the government's policy around foreign nationals. That's a huge number of people. And someone's got to replace these employees. They're not, I promise you, they're not all at top and senior and middle management level. These are people that are at semi-skilled, unskilled, junior management level.
Great.
Then you've got the employment equity targets. And remember, employment equity starts, like if you look at the progression from semi-skilled to junior management, middle, senior, about 215,000 employees will be displaced in the next 5 years as companies move towards achieving their employment equity targets. You look at platform workers, around 150,000 platform workers who are currently not employees are going to become employees of someone. You know, if you just add up those three things, those three disruptors right now that we face, you're almost at 800,000 employees in the labor market that are going to be disrupted. And you know, to your point, Albie, is the only way to find out how it affects customers or clients is to go sit with them and say, how many foreign nationals do you have? You know, how many, what's your deficit? Let's benchmark you against the employment equity targets. Where are you going to get these skills from? You need specific sub-race and gender categories. When we bring pickers, packers, forklift drivers, operators in, let's get people in who are the right race and gender subcategory. Let's get people in that we've assessed in terms of their potential, not only for their current jobs, but for future growth. You know, when it comes to digital platform work, etc. And those are just three examples. You know, and therein lies up to 800,000 people being displaced. You know, that's a large number. That's almost 7 or 8% of our South African workforce. Then beyond this, of course, all the other things that are happening around, if you look at motor manufacturers, electrical vehicles, plastic components, braking systems. You know, you look at food manufacturing and the automation of food manufacturing. We see the one Nestle plant in Babelege. It was in News 24. One Nestle plant, I don't know what they're manufacturing, but they got 20 odd workers in this massive plant that used to previously employ maybe a few hundred people. You know, those are the things that we need to get stuck into. But you're not going to get that level of engagement with a client by going to them with some vanilla discussion. You're going to have to be a thought leader. You're going to have to build smart trust in the mind of your client, that when they share this info with you, they know that they're sharing it with someone who's capable of partnering with them. And I think that's why I'm worried about this one-trick pony thing, because all I've seen in TESs in that environment is they're getting displaced. So they automate the plant and the TESs are, you know. I'm not seeing where they come back in again.
Yeah, that is scary. If there's any other questions for John from the floor, please feel free.
John, it's Kevin.
Kev, how's it?
How are you doing?
I'm part of the aging workforce, Kev.
Yeah, part of the aging workforce. My involvement with NEDLAC is going back in terms of the aging workforce for about 25 years. And like yourself, done the ILO, done the negotiations, and still continue to do so. The reason why I say that is because some of the issues that we've discussed 25 years ago are now being discussed now still. So I think one's got to be very careful with the issue of painting, the workforce and the work environment with one brush. I think a lot of what comes out of the WEC, as with regard to what comes out of the ILO, is very generic, and it's not specific to certain issues and certain industries. For example, so I agree with the situation in terms of the change in the nature of work, in terms of the number of hands that are required and the manpower. So we have a very good example of this where we look at what's happening in warehouses today. We're building massive warehouses, but previously warehouses of the same size were run by 100 to 150 people, and in certain instances over 200. Today, warehouses of double that size, we're running them with 25 to 35 people. So that is one example of what you're saying in terms of issue around digital and technologies. You mentioned the whole story about, or reference to the way goods are handled and managed. And traditionally, you've needed a RT driver or someone of the same nature. Today, you don't need those drivers because the whole process within the manufacturing environment and also within the automobile environment is automated. It's like the green areas model that the Japanese had with Nissan about 25 years ago, or 20 years ago, where things arrived at a specific spot and they were quality checked and they were added to the vehicle, and the vehicle then were moved on to another spot, which was quality check. And so at the end of the day, instead of doing a holistic quality check on one particular vehicle, when it arrived at the release station, it was quality check. There was no need for extra hands to do that. And that's what the green area concept actually brought to the manufacturing and the automobile world. But what is on the other side is we see that, there are other sectors within the economy and also worldwide, which are becoming or not shedding the manpower requirements. So, for instance, we look at the construction industry, we look at the building industry, we look at other allied industries, we look at metal ferrous industries. They've adopted some of the processes of automation, but the manual or the people input has in fact increased. So I think there's a dilemma there, and I think one's got to study this very much fit for purpose. And I think that is the same thing with our industry, the test industry. It's a unique industry because it actually fits in wherever work is. The test industry fits in. So if your client, and you might have multiple clients, is dealing with the road freight industry or dealing within the construction industry, your model, your profile that your client is going to present you is going to be different in terms of manpower employment and contracting. So I think that one's going to be a little bit, how can I say, concerned about, pepper the process with it, because it is certainly an element that cannot be put aside. But thanks, John, for a great presentation.
No, thanks, Kevin, and we're on the same page, and colleagues, I really encourage you to go and research what Kevin's just spoken about. We've got great statistics per industry, per sector. You can see the growth or decline in employment levels. You've got sector skills plans coming out of the SETAs. You know, you need to take a look at those different sectors, the trends, and then the disruptors in those. One thing that, and again, I just want to just share this with you. It's the most simple of concepts, colleagues, but it is so meaningful. And this talks to the diversity that Kevin was alluding to, and that we've been talking about. And maybe I'll just end off with this for today, but there's this thing called an empathy map. Now, if I could only find it, it would be of great value. There we go. So I might have shown you this in one of the previous engagements, but there's this thing called an empathy map, which you see on the screen. You know, colleagues, sometimes it's as simple as sitting down with the client, be it in construction, wholesale, retail, manufacturing, sitting with the client in a safe environment and just saying to the client, when it comes to the services we're offering you, what are people saying about us as a provider? What are people thinking? What are people feeling? And I know it sounds very, very basic, but you know, colleagues, out of a simple engagement like this, your client's going to give you feedback that you might be paying certain research and client satisfaction companies hundreds of thousands of rand to do. Your clients are going to say to you, listen, we think that your service levels aren't great. We think that your candidate caliber is not great. We think that your margins are too high. We think that, you know, you're going to decline in usage over the next few years because we're automating or mechanizing. We think this, that, and the other. You see, colleagues, that is where your differentiator lies, because it's not only an early warning system, but it's a predictor of what lies ahead. And I don't think that if you've got a proper, you know, and a smart trust relationship with your clients, I don't see why they won't share this information with you. It's incredibly insightful. You see, the problem is we assume we know what the solutions are. We assume we know that this is the best proposition. And I'll just end off. I mean, I was part of a visit to a client once, and the client told the TES, the financial director told the TES, we're paying you too much money, your margins are too high. And the TES then went about trying to defend their margins and to tell the client just how good the TES is and all that they do for the client. And that's not the approach. You see, if we look at the World Employment Confederation, they talk about the human aspect, not only the human aspect of your assignees, but your clients as well, because mass production is replaced by mass customization. So if we bothered in that meeting, and I'll end off with this, if we bothered in that meeting to just say to the financial director and the exco, listen, we hear what you're saying about our margins being high, and we're not contesting it, but we want to understand. Please tell us why you're saying this. Please tell us why you feel this way. Please tell us what people are thinking about this. You might find that that financial director the previous week got an instruction from Germany to decrease their overheads by 10%. You see, and instead of becoming defensive and you don't understand the cost of money and you don't understand all we do, we need to listen and we need to say, I'm not judging you, I hear you. And I hear why the margin's now an issue, but now let's collaborate. Let's see how we can get to the 10% or whatever it is saving. You see, often that relationship is broken right up front because we haven't bothered to immerse ourselves in the life of that client, because that client's got a customized, unique need that needs to be fulfilled. Whether it's technology, automation, cost saving, whatever it is, for me, that is the best proposition that you can have, because it also shows you care and that you're not there just for the money. LB colleagues, that's the end for today from my side. Thanks for the opportunity again. A bit boring, I acknowledge, but hopefully you've picked something up. Thank you.
John, it was everything but boring. I mean, surely it ignited some thoughts that I've had previously and put pen to paper. So always, as you produce and present these webinars, there's always something to take away. There's always something to make you think, and I think that's why we continue coming back to you. Thank you once again for your insights. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.